Well, welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. Well, that was an interesting conversation with one of the candidates for the Green Party. We're now joined by another candidate, Annamie Paul. She's a Canadian civic engagement activist and human rights lawyer. She's worked on increasing diversity in government roles and supporting social innovation. She was a candidate in the 2019 federal election and is also running to be the Green Party of Canada leader. How are you? Welcome to our show.
Thank you very much. It's nice to be here. It's always interesting to hear yourself described. I'm a civic engagement activist.
Well, is that not correct?
Well, no, it absolutely. You know, I certainly hope that anyone running for the leadership of the Green Party is someone that considers them to be themselves to be a civic engagement activist. Perhaps that's referring to the time that I founded and directed the Canadian Centre for Political Leadership. And we were focused on increasing the representation of underrepresented groups in Canadian politics. So I'm guessing it's that.
Fantastic. And where did you run in the last election?
So I ran in Toronto Centre. I ran against the incumbent in that riding was the Finance Minister, Bill Morneau. And
what do you think is going to happen to him?
I do not know. I do not know. Where I see the process is playing out in committee, and there is still a lot of unanswered questions. I look forward to seeing that whole process unfold. It looks like it's consuming, unfortunately, quite a lot of attention, and certainly that really needs to be directed towards other things. There's still a lot of Canadians that are suffering and still don't have a social safety net that's helping see them through this crisis. So hopefully we'll get away from these distractions and back to those urgent needs as soon as possible.
Toronto Centre is a particularly challenging riding to win, is it not? It goes all the way from the lake up to above Bloor Street. It's got, I think, some of the most high-end homes in all of Toronto at the north end and some pretty impoverished areas in the middle. Why pick that riding?
Well, you're right. It's really a microcosm of a riding. It's the smallest riding in Toronto. It doesn't quite go all the way to the lake. It ends at the Esplanade. I was born in the old Toronto Centre, and my mother started her teaching career in the schools there. My grandmother worked as a nurse's aide in the hospitals there. And it's a place where if you can convincingly convey the message of a party there, then you pretty much can anywhere. And I really also wanted to run in a place where you could see how many urgent changes were needed. And I thought, as I do now, that the Green Party was offering the very best solutions on things like affordability, the climate emergency, of course, but also other very local things like safety. You know, it has some of the worst crime statistics in all of Toronto. And I'm always trying to look for the places where I can be part of the solution.
It's been a Liberal stronghold for a long time, has it not?
Indeed it has, yes.
Can the Greens win there?
Of course, we can win anywhere. You know, we're at the stage now where I believe that particularly in the next couple of months, that people in Canada, many of whom have said very clearly that they do not want to go back to the way things were, that we are all waking up and realizing how many parts of our social safety net just simply are not working for people. We just don't want to go back to that. We don't ever want to be in the situation again where so many people wake up one day and find themselves without a job, without a source of revenue, and perhaps with parents in long-term care homes or other disabled people in long-term care homes and worrying about whether it's a death sentence. So this is the time when parties like ours who have been talking about these things for a very, very long time, this is when we have the chance to say to people in Canada, look, take a look at our policies. We've been talking about these a long time. We have really good proposals. And if you don't want to go back, then you don't choose the same leadership again. We're the best option, I believe, under the circumstances.
Your website says that one of your major planks is that you are the party of democratic renewal. What do you intend to do to change our democratic electoral system?
Well, I believe very strongly that people are not failing the system. It's the other way around. The system is failing people. When we talk about things like voter apathy or the lack of engagement of young people, I definitely don't see that in my day-to-day life. In our campaign, there are many, many young people who are involved, many people from various walks of life, but it's hard to get people excited about a system that they feel is rigged against them and isn't going to represent their voice. If you can get elected with a majority governments, with only about a third of the people in the country voting for you, then there's something wrong. And so we need to be looking at the ways that we can get people excited about democracy again, the way that we can redesign it so that people feel more engaged and they want to come out to vote and they want to get involved in many other ways. And what I'm proposing and the Green Party is proposing is to look at a series of measures, things like proportional representation, the voting age, et cetera, in order to get people, reinvigorated and re-excited about the system.
Well, proportional representation I've heard about lots of times, but voting age, what do you want to do that?
Well, we want to explore what other countries have, which is what is the right age? What is the appropriate age for people in Canada to start voting? We know that the earlier citizens get involved in voting in a formal, structured way, the more likely they are to engage with the system for the whole rest of their lives. There are many things that people can do at 16. And we also know that being 16 in 2020 is not the same as it was as being 16 in 1920. And so, one of the things that we want to explore is whether we should be making adjustments to the voting age, lowering it so that young people can get engaged in the system earlier, and hopefully we'll get a better voter turnout. But I wouldn't prejudge that, just to stress it. I'm not advocating for any particular position. What I want to see is us having a really robust national discussion about that and several other measures that in other countries have worked for democratic renewal and might or might not work here.
Why not advocate it? Because the very next plank on your website says that you want to be the party of daring, which sort of sounds like Obama's audacity word. And, why not come out and say, I'm going to reduce the voting age to 16? That would be daring.
It would be daring, but I'm also one of the other planks in again, it's not a platform, but our vision is democratic. And so we can't forget about that. We are a party of evidence-based, very innovative policy. I'm all for that. You need to bring people along with you, and you need to make sure that people are consulted. So if you're talking about any major structural changes in how our democracy functions, then you want to make sure that you do it in the most democratic way possible. And so it's absolutely possible to have change, but to do it in a way that people feel consulted and included.
Elizabeth May, some people think, is sort of the Green Party of Canada. And how are you going to live in her footsteps?
Well, Elizabeth is absolutely, there are no sufficient number of words to thank Elizabeth for all that she's done for the party. The party has, I think it was about 3,000 members when she first ran. I think it was 6,000 by the end of the race, and now we have over 24,000, and we have 3 seats in Parliament. And so we have a lot to thank her for. Any new leader has to carve out their own path, obviously in with respect for the work that's being done before them. And in the case of the Green Party, the leader really is a spokesperson for the membership and their policies. And so this is a time for renewal in the Green Party in many, many ways. We have new federal council members. We have a new leader that's coming in, and we also have our policy convention this year. And so this is a time for us to think about where do we want to go next, building on the past, but definitely carving out not a new direction, but having a renewed pathway to the future.
My best friend worked for you in the last election, a gentleman by the name of Steve Cox. I'm not sure if
yes.
you met him. He was encouraging me to come to a fundraiser for you at one specific time.
That's great.
And we had lots of arguments about the sense of voting for the Green Party. And I argued that strategic voting was key, because a vote for the Green Party in too many places was just a vote for the Conservative Party. What do you say to that?
I believe that people should vote the way that their conscience and their common sense is telling them to vote. I've had the really good fortune, Ryan, of living in different countries. I had the chance to work abroad and even work for Canadians abroad in global affairs. And I've actually lived in countries where Greens have made breakthroughs, or living close to countries where Greens made breakthroughs. And it really took people just saying, again, they're not going to keep voting, even with all of those strategic considerations in mind, even with their usual voting habits. They just said, if we want something different, we're going to need to make different choices. It's usually around the time of a disruption, a major disruption. And for the most part, they're quite happy with those choices that they've made. And so I really believe that this is the time that Canadians are going to be looking at our current situation and making the same calculations. And, that we do need some kind of disruption like that to make the breakthrough. And I think that the pandemic and the climate emergency, these are exactly the kind of conditions where Green parties have made breakthroughs in other countries.
The Green Party obviously tries to be a national party and runs candidates in every riding across the country and competes across the country. But you got almost the same number of votes as the Bloc Québécois, and you won just a handful of seats in the Bloc Québécois because they focused only on Quebec, obviously, with the same number of votes, gets like 40 seats. Have you got the right strategy? Why don't you just focus on Atlantic Canada, maybe, urban Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, and Vancouver Island?
Well, first of all, I think that you summarized in a nutshell the problems with our existing electoral system. How is it that we receive the same number of votes as the Bloc, and we only end up with 3 seats, and they end up with significantly more? I think that helped. That's a very neat way of explaining the problem that we have. But even in the system that exists, and even if it exists for the foreseeable future, what we believe, and certainly what I believe, is that people in Canada have should have the opportunity to vote for Greens wherever they live. And we certainly wouldn't ever want to arrive at the point that we are so strategic about our thinking that we forget that. And so we are going to continue to run Greens across the country in all of our ridings. Fredericton, I would say that wasn't expected to be a breakthrough riding for us, and yet there it was. And that can happen anywhere. So no, we are a national party. We want to give people the opportunity to vote for us wherever they are. And so we're going to keep running candidates across the country.
What do you think is going to happen to your riding, to downtown Toronto? Both from a residential standpoint as well as from a commercial office employment standpoint because of COVID-19. And is that positive for the economy or negative to the economy?
Well, just to emphasize, it's not my riding. There's sometimes this proprietary, and I guess understandably so, you become very attached. And I became very attached to the volunteers, to the riding association, to the people in the community, and you always ideally want to have that connection. But the moment that the election was over, I no longer had any dibs on that riding, and so and that's the case for all of the people who ran in the last election. But this period is a very, very fragile moment for Toronto Centre. There are many large pockets of low-income people who work in precarious work in that riding. They were struggling before, and this is exactly the kind of thing that could push them over the edge. There are also affordability issues in terms of housing as well. The cities are on their knees. The cities were already struggling, and the pandemic has made a bad situation worse. And of course, many of the services that people rely on in Toronto Centre are provided at the municipal level. And so what I'm personally looking to see, and I think everyone should be looking to see, is how well can the various levels of government cooperate together? How well can they share resources to make sure that no one falls through the cracks, regardless of jurisdiction? I don't want to see anyone fighting over jurisdiction when it comes to meeting these urgent needs of people.
But are people going to be less interested in living in high-rise condominiums and going to work in high-rise office buildings in downtown Toronto and going on GO trains and subways that it's very difficult, if not impossible, to physically distance?
Well, we at the moment there aren't alternatives to that. You know, we have through the lack of urban planning and the lack of investment in the areas outside of our cities, and the lack of building, you know, critical infrastructure like transportation hubs. We've made it very difficult for people to have full and complete lives if they aren't in the center. If you're out of the center, you often have to travel in for work, for instance. And again, it certainly doesn't have to be this way. And this is one of the things that I bring to the contest, for instance. I have the comparative knowledge of living in places where people can actually work outside of the city center very successfully. So this is really a moment for us to it's a great question that you ask. We really need to be thinking about how can we make the investments with these hundreds of billions of dollars that we're going to be spending over the next few years. How can we use that money best in order to change that, in order to make other communities outside of the urban centers thrive, allow people to live in a different and a more sustainable way. And for the moment, there really is no option for most people if they're going to work than to do things the way that they've been doing. And I'm sure there are many people that are just incredibly stressed about it.
You've mentioned a few times now some of your international experience. Where have you worked internationally?
So I began working in global affairs in the Canadian mission to the European Union in Brussels. And I also worked at the International Criminal Court in the Office of the Prosecutor. I also worked as the EU Director for an international conflict prevention NGO. And I founded an innovation hub in Barcelona, Spain, that serves as a catalyst for relatively new international NGOs working on global challenges.
Fascinating. That's a great experience.
It is, and nice places to live too.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
You know, one of the big challenges that Canada has right now, and I think the Liberal Party is facing, is Alberta and Saskatchewan, that has been, you know, so focused on the fossil fuel industry. The Green Party obviously has voted against Kinder Morgan, has been big environmentally focused. What would be your response to fossil fuel, to oil companies, to natural gas companies, to people that are working in the fossil fuel business in Alberta, Saskatchewan?
Well, the first thing that we all bring our own experiences to our policies and to the race, and actually that's one of the reasons why it's really so important to have diverse representation in politics. My story is that my brother, until he was laid off just a little while ago, was working as a roughneck in the oil patch in Alberta. And so when I think about this, it's very personal. And when I say that I care about the future of fossil fuel workers, you can believe me when I say that. And what I'm focused on is making sure that there is a future for people like him and the people who he's worked on his crews, that gives them a proper, well-paying job of the future. It's a sector that's in decline, and it's in an irreversible decline. And so again, when we think about where are we going to be spending all of this money that we're going to be investing, when we get to the point of talking about stimulus for the economy as opposed to emergency, I want to see it being spent on sectors where we can create sustainable, high-paying jobs like renewable energies, building infrastructure, retrofitting buildings. Those are all things that people who work in the oil patch are really suited to do on day one. And then more than anything, we just absolutely can't forget that we're talking about people and communities. They need to be involved in the decisions. Nothing can be imposed on anyone. We need to let them know that we care, and we need to let them know, I think, that we are going to make our breakthrough out on the prairies, for instance, when people out there are convinced that we have the very best plan for their future. So that's what I want to see our party doing, showing that we care and showing that we have the very best plan for the future.
I've done a bunch of shows with people post the incident in Minneapolis a couple of months ago, and the protests across both the United States and some in Canada. You obviously, and a lot of people have talked about the lack of examples of people that have been able to break through and be very successful is one of the challenges. of growing up Black in Canada today. You've obviously got a great education. You've had international experience. You've been quite successful. Why have you been successful when it's challenging for so many others? And have you actually encountered racism in your career?
The answer to the second part of your question is certainly. It's not something that you can escape. I've encountered racism and anti-Semitism in the context of this race. You know, I'm Black. I'm also Jewish, and so in both of those identities have been attacked at different times during this race. So these things are really live issues. In my case, it's
how?
You know, in my
Can I ask how?
Sorry.
How is your race and
the
your
usual
religion attacked?
Yeah, the usual, the social media, which is something I really had never been engaged with before running in the last election. I'd never had any social media accounts. There are regular postings that just the usual slurs, and we had slurs in the last that were posted in the chat during our last debate as well. Some directed at me, some directed at other candidates. And so it's something that you never get comfortable with, but you just try not to let distract you too much during the race. In terms of me, I can't really answer that. I don't think that there's anything, one thing or any particular thing that I could point to that allowed me to succeed where people in exactly the same circumstances did not. My mother was a really great example. Perhaps that's something. She came to Canada. She had to work for several years as a live-in housekeeper. That was the only way that she could come to Canada, even though she was a teacher. She had to start all over. She got her bachelor's again and became a teacher in the schools here, and then went back to school with 4 kids under the age of 12 to get her master's degree. And so I guess I don't feel that extraordinary when I think of everything that she managed. And she taught full time while she did all of that. So
What do you think
I'm nothing special.
To race relations in Canada is?
Sorry?
What do you think the solution to race relations in Canada is?
A big part of the solution to race relations in Canada is to have more diversity in the room when we're taking policy decisions that can either help race relations or harm them. It's very hard to develop a great policy around criminal justice, for instance, when we know that Black and Indigenous peoples are hugely overrepresented in the criminal justice system. Without having Black and Indigenous people participating in developing those policies. One of the reasons I'm such a big fan of diversity is because during my studies, I did a lot of work on that, and the research just tells us very clearly, whether it's the boardroom or whether it's parliament, that when you have diverse perspectives at the table, that it actually creates better dividends for shareholders and better public policy for the public. So if we're talking about race relations, one of the big problems is often the people who are most impacted by systemic racism, for instance, aren't in the room when the policies are developed. So I would start with that.
If people are motivated by this conversation and want to help you out, how do they join the Green Party and vote for you?
Excellent question, and let me answer that. So I encourage people to visit our website, which is annamiepaul.ca, and you can see my name there at the bottom. You have all the information that you need about my policies, about our campaign, about our vision. You can also sign up to vote. If you're signing up to vote, September 3rd is the deadline to do that. We really encourage you to do it. We're trying to make some history here. And the link is the same if you'd like to make a donation. We always love to hear from people. We really want the Green Party to attract a lot of new people throughout the race. So everyone's welcome to join and to contact us, and I'd love to hear from them.
Annamie Paul, candidate for leader of the Green Party, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure.